Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. This is part one of our special two-part series with the two finalists in the Denver mayoral runoff. The first candidate is the incumbent, Michael Hancock. Michael, thanks so much for being here.
Aaron Harber, good to see you, man.
Hey, it's
Thank
great
you for having me.
Great to have you on the show again. And his challenger, community expert of many affairs, I should say, Jamie Giellis. Jamie, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, as a urban community expert, I've been very impressed with all the projects that you've been involved in. And I'm really going to be interested in your take on not just what Michael's done, but what you would want to do as mayor. But before I start, I want to say a few thank yous. I want to thank Live Nation and the Summit for providing this venue and making sure that Denverites have a chance to see the candidates live. These candidates have done a number of debates, and I'll ask you how many debate requests I'll ask you, how many debate requests did you each get? Michael?
I have no idea. We're trying to do all of them, but I have no idea how many.
Jamie, do you have any idea?
I think we counted that we did 32 debates in the primary, and there's probably been, I don't know, a dozen debates in the runoff that have been requested.
And you certainly haven't been able to do every one that you've been asked to do. I know that. So Live Nation, thank you very much. Channel 3, I'd like to thank. Channel 3 is providing us, for those watching Sunday night right now, for example, 2 hours of prime time to give Denver voters, every Denver voter, a chance to see these candidates, talk about the issues in depth. And so I'd like to thank Greg Armstrong, the president and general manager of Channel 3 especially, for making that kind of time available. I'd also like to thank the many people from Denver and actually all around the state who submitted questions for this. I was overwhelmed with the number of responses we got, and I'm going to do my best to incorporate as many of them into my questions as I can. And finally, I'd like to thank the candidates. The fact that they're giving us this much time is extraordinary. But most of all, I want to thank you two for running, and that a lot of people do not realize the sacrifice one makes when running for office, the impact on partners, husbands, wives, family. Not that you have multiple husbands or wives, but families, kids, and all that. So thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. All right, I'd like to start off by asking you, if you are elected, Michael, I'm going to start with you. If you are elected, what will Denver look like in 4 years?
You know, Aaron, first of all, let me thank you as well for inviting us and extending the invitation to be with you, and as well as the studio audience that's here with us. And you're absolutely right. I don't think many people think about the human toll. You know, getting home late, your family is maybe up waiting for you in anticipation, and all you want to do is get to bed and get ready to go for the next day. So we know they really pay an unparalleled price for us to do these, take advantage of these opportunities. And so thank you for acknowledging that. You know what, over the last 8 years, it really has been about transforming Denver. Intentionally or unintentionally, this city has grown extremely, exponentially over the last 8 years. 110,000 people in the last 10 years come into the city. And so Denver has had to evolve as a part of it. You know, the next term for me is really going to be about balance. It's going to be about balance and equity, and how we are no longer about recovering as we were in the first term and really trying to set Denver on an economic path in the second term. It really is going to be about how we take the prosperity and desirability we have as a great city today, continue to lead across the global marketplace, and be that attraction for people who want to visit Denver, people who may even consider living in Denver, but also want to make investments in Denver. We want to be that desirable place. And so I think what you're going to see when I'm done, after 12 years as mayor, the most modern city in the country, still the most desirable city to live in, to want to live in, to start your job, to build your business, to raise your children. Those are the things we've always yearned for. We wanted to be the best city to live in, the best city to raise your children, your family, and the best city to build your future. And by being the most modern city that invests in the right places, continue to connect with the people who live here, the people who are visiting, we'll do that. And the people of Denver have been generous to invest when necessary, and we'll continue to do that as well.
All right. Jamie, in 4 years under your leadership, what will Denver look like? What will be different? What do you want to do?
Well, I got into this race for the people of the city. I'm not a career politician. I don't come with a long resume in politics. I've been a community problem solver, as you said. I've been somebody who started my own company. because I saw an opportunity to serve as a bridge between communities and local government. And I have a real interest in being a problem solver around the issues that come with growth. When we look at what's happened over the last 8 years, there's undoubtedly been some great things that have come with how the city has evolved. But at the end of the day, economic prosperity for some can't come at the cost of economic prosperity for everybody. And when you're out talking to people in the community, as I have been during the campaign and working in Denver's neighborhoods for the last few years, you sense pain and frustration that growth has overwhelmed their neighborhoods, that congestion has made their commutes hard, that the cost of living has made it difficult for them to stay in their homes and have their families here. So when we talk about the opportunity we have for the next 4 years, I think it's to capitalize on what people love about Denver, which is the quality of life, and redirect our energy and focus into ensuring that our neighborhoods are strong, that our people are strong, that we are addressing those issues from how we grow, what the character of our community looks like as we grow, how we address transportation and mobility, how we ensure green space and take care of our environment, how we look at how we're treating the homeless community and the affordability of housing, as well as supporting business, but recognizing that we won't be prosperous economically if we let growth continue to lead without addressing the quality of life. So for me, it's really, how does Denver evolve to become the most livable city in the country? How do we really protect people in the process of growing?
All right, one of the things I want to talk about, I don't know if there's been much discussion, but a number of the issues you both have raised and referenced. But let's kind of start off with the city's budget. And it's something that a lot of people don't spend a tremendous amount of time talking about. But give me a sense from both of you, Jamie first and Michael, about the size of the budget. Is this something you've studied? Do you each know how big the city's budget is? I'll toss it to you, Jamie. That'd be too easy a question for Michael. So.
Well, there's no doubt we've had, the city's budget has grown explosively in the last 8 years from when Michael took office, about 1.2 billion total, up to close to 2.5 billion now. And some of that, of course, due in part to the debrucing that happened in 2012, I believe. So we've seen extraordinary growth. Our population in that same amount of time has grown by about 11%. Our budget has grown extraordinarily. Our city workforce has grown by 20% in that same time. I think the big question that we need to look at as we dig into the budget, it's a complex thing to look at the budget. When you read the document, to understand to the specific priorities and projects where it's going. For example, the budget shows 14 million going to homelessness. The mayor talks about 61 million. We have to really get a grasp on what our benchmark, what are our goals, how are we deploying funds? And I think also incredibly important is to acknowledge the softening in the economy, the likelihood of a slowdown or a full-blown recession, and that we have an incredible amount of debt. And we have, in terms of bonding, and we have some really significant projects, including the airport and the convention center, and others that are going over budget or potential have to go over budget. So for me, job number one to get in is to do a real audit of what's happening with our resources. Are we spending in the right places? I saw a quote earlier today where somebody said, you get a sense of the city's real priorities when you see where the funds are being spent. So to understand, are we using our resources most effectively to, again, tackle those issues that really speak to the heart of quality of life for people and how a city grows effectively day to day.
All right, well, I'm going to be interested in what you would do differently, but you referenced a couple of things I wanted Michael to get a chance to talk about and respond to, especially the two homeless figures that you referenced. So please, Michael.
Yeah, Jamie's right, about almost $2.5 billion within the budget. And what we've seen over the last 8 years while I have served as mayor is, city services have increased 55%, which means that trash collection, snow removal, some of the basic services and human services, those very basic services that we implement as a city have grown by 55%, meeting and managing the growth of the city. but our workforce has only grown by 19%. So, about a third of the workforce has been needed to implement that 55% increase. What we know is that our greatest revenue sources come from our core use and sales taxes in Denver. We have seen 3 consecutive quarters of a collection of those sources softening. So as the manager of this city and working with my chief financial officer, we begin the process of massaging and working how we're going to get through an economic slowdown in the city of Denver. We begin to communicate directly with department leads and begin to set the stage for preparing the city for an economic slowdown. So you have to be smart, you have to lean in, and you also have to know the budget. Because if we're going to have an economic slowdown, you got to know where to go to create opportunities to save the city resources while at the same time continuing to deliver essential services. And that's what we've learned when I was sitting as president of council with Mayor Hickenlooper and really helped bring this city through the depths of that economic recession that we dealt with. And of course, when I became mayor, the first act I had to undertake was cut $100 million from our operations so that we can get through. And we were in the Mayoral, but today we have restored our fund balance in the city of Denver. We have a balanced budget thanks to the voters in 2012 to really address the structural challenge. And the reality is we do spend close to $60 million on homelessness, and it's spread across the departments. And one of the things that the audit has made very clear for us, and let me be clear, I'm from nonprofit world as an executive. There's no greater tool for a nonprofit executive than an audit, because it gives you really a picture of how you're performing within the program, but also where you need to shore things up so you can be more efficient and make sure that you are actually getting what you need from the resources that you're investing. So I don't take offense from the auditor when he speaks and leans in. It's about us getting better, not to criticize or play political games with it, but get better. And so when he said we are too federated with regards to our housing and homelessness challenges, we need to consolidate. Well, my administration had already done the analysis. We were moving in that direction, and we had just put leadership in place to help execute that. So that when you want to find where those almost $60 million are going, you can see it as opposed to being federated across the city budget. But yeah, it's in Denver Health and Hospitals, it's in Denver Human Services, it's in our Crime Prevention and Control Office, it's in Denver's Road Home, it's in Economic Development. It's spread across, and it's a major matrix sheet if you look at it, where those resources are coming from. But indeed, we are making the investment trying to meet the whole person and get to the root cause of the challenges around homelessness.
Has there been any consideration, I'd like to ask the same question of Jamie, Michael, of taking a zero-based budgeting approach where every department every 2 years or periodically has to start from scratch so that you get to really see if there are areas that you could save a substantial amount of money?
Yeah, as a city, one of my majors in college was studying public finance, and some cities do zero-based budgeting. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But let me explain what we do in Denver, and I think explain it through the lens of our peak performance initiative that I brought in as mayor, which has now saved the city of Denver taxpayers over $30 million since I've been mayor. And that is using our most precious resource, our city employees, really helping us understand the value of the steps that we take and rooting out steps that really add cost, time, and inefficiencies to the process. So it's better known as continuous process improvement. But today, we have trained in excess of 7,000 city employees, and so I have a consulting firm of 7,000 employees I can dispatch anywhere in the city to help us solve problems. One example of that would be when I became mayor, the average wait time for you to walk into DMV and renew your tags was 1 hour, 20 minutes. Today, it's less than 15 minutes. City employees went through the process, saved money, and moved forward. So when you talk about zero-based budgeting, in Denver's system, zero-based budgeting would be very difficult because you still have personnel costs that are fixed. It's almost 60% of the budget. So it's unrealistic and really, quite frankly, would be a false wall to say we start with zero-based budgeting because you're not going to fire all those career service people, and you can't. And you got to keep essential services rolling. So you have fixed costs and safety, fixed costs and trash removal. So let's not play games. Drive efficiencies, use your employees as the greatest resource to drive those efficiencies and deliver the most lean and efficient services to the people of Denver on the most basic services that are expected.
So Jamie, I'd be interested in your thoughts on zero-based budgeting, and also if you have any specifics when you look at that multi-billion-dollar figure, what would you do differently?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. We have to take a look at how we do budgeting and where our resources are being spent. And I think, honestly, while we've heard all the reasons why we can't do things, we have to look at where other cities are succeeding in this effort and what tools are out there for us to do our best possible job. And a new administration always provides an opportunity to have a fresh look at approaches to budgeting, at where money is actually being deployed. I also think there are other cities that are adopting participatory budgeting and ways to actually get the community at the table to help identify priorities. And as I said before, what your budget says a lot about your priorities as a city. I think the big thing to look at within the budget is, first of all, you look at, for example, safety department. There's an extraordinary amount of upper end costs associated with that, while costs for the actual personnel on the street, on the ground doing the work has not increased at the same rate. Those types of
upper end, you're saying administration?
That's right.
Or,
that's right. Okay. So I think looking at department by department, those types of things. Also, back to the homeless as just an example, the homeless issue and the 61 million. Making sure that we are deploying that in the most effective and efficient way to actually tackle the challenge. One of the other things the audit identified is that there's a real lack of benchmarks and goals and strategy. So if you don't know what you're trying to achieve or the steps you're going to take to achieve it, you're sort of throwing money out there hoping that you're tackling a really complex problem. So again, I think that's why I said one of the first things to do is truly audit the budget and understand. Even some city council folks, in talking with them, have a hard time sometimes understanding, because I don't think a lot of people know that the mayor sets the budget for the most part. It goes through city council, council has opportunity to comment on it, but it's really the mayor that has unilateral control over setting and identifying the priorities. I think that needs to be a more democratic process with a lot more input and a lot more transparency into actually where funds are going to tackle specific goals.
Can I address some of that?
Please.
So there's 3 points that Jamie's wrong on here. One, we work with City Council very closely, and actually at the onset of the budget process, they submit to my administration their budget priorities every year. And interestingly enough, every budget session or cycle that I have managed as mayor, our priorities as administration align almost directly with what City Council has put forward. So City Council does lean in. Following their retreat, we take their priorities and we work very closely with them. Secondly, I think it's important to be very clear about the priorities of the city. In my administration, and the staff will tell you that the mayor often says, your budget, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. And so what we have seen is an increase in the city of Denver on funding for housing, which has been something that the city did not fund directly. I'm the first mayor to ever allocate resources for housing from the general fund. We started doing that in 2012. And so we began the process of saying this is an important priority for us as a city, and we do it in various forms. And it's important to recognize that housing, homelessness, and to also benchmark and make sure you understand, when Mayor Hancock came in, where were the numbers? She oftentimes talks about or uses the phrase, homelessness has quadrupled in Denver since the mayor has been in office. And reality, actually, it has decreased 34.6% in the last 8 years that I've been in office. And so our processes are working, and the money being federated is also, or at least being allocated in different ways to address the real root causes, have made a difference. Finally, in safety, one of the first acts that our Chief Robert White, did when he came in was to remove a lot of the top heaviness of the police department. I noticed it when I was on city council. There were like 4 or 5 deputy chiefs of police. Robert White came in, Chief White came in, there was 1 deputy chief. Began to clear out. And his responsibility was, if it didn't take a gun or a badge for a police officer to do it, then it shouldn't be. We began the process of civilianizing a lot of the responsibilities that police officers who were making a lot of money sitting in offices making, they were dispersed throughout the city, back to patrol, back to the actual roles of the police department. So take a look at those steps that we took early on in administration. You begin to see the process of my administration beginning to lean out some of those executive offices in public safety.
All right, one of Jamie's comments, though, was that in terms of the variance of numbers, 14 million, 61 million for the homeless, and I want to talk more later about homelessness, is the concept of what are the specific goals, what are the specific targets. So can you tell us a little bit more about those, and is there an end in sight, or what's the challenge?
Well, here's the reality. Homelessness is first of all, it is a crisis in humanity when we have homeless at all in our city of Denver. Our first approach and priority has always been housing first in the city of Denver. It's about getting people from the streets to housing. In the last 8 years, my administration has housed close to 8,000 homeless residents in permanent housing. We've also opened up 3 new shelters since I've been mayor, Aaron. And we're also about to open a 46-bed solution center for those who are in crises and need to have some stabilizing services and a bed while they're going through their crises. But we've done a couple other things. We've also implemented an innovative, what we call a social impact bond. I don't expect the general public to understand that, but what it is permanent supportive housing, where we've built a 325-unit facility, and we've housed over 325 people, wrapped with intensive services like mental health, drug and alcohol services. We funded that through a bond program. Investors say, hey, it's a social good. We're going to make money, or get our dividend back based on keeping people out of jail, keeping them out of rehab, and breaking the very expensive cycle of homelessness. After 4 years, 80% plus of those individuals are still in that facility, meaning we've been able to stabilize them. Denver Day Works program, several hundred people have come through there, received permanent employment. I was just with a young man today named Larry, who now works for the city of Denver wastewater department, was homeless when he came into our program, worked with us a few days, and now he's part of our career service team of the city and county of Denver. And he talked about how it changed his life. He now has his own place, he's no longer homeless, and he's gainfully employed as a career servant for the city of Denver. So that program, as well as 2 additional ones, our co-responder program, where we put social workers in the cars with police officers, again, breaking that expensive cycle, and our 24/7 opt-in service that we have, a drop-in service at on-demand is what we call it, on-demand service at Denver Health to deal with the addiction challenges. So we have a myriad of efforts underway. Those are very expensive programs. That's where you begin to add up $60+ million that we're investing. But at the end of the day, we're also trying to meet the homeless where they are and help them stabilize their lives and move on to a more stable lifestyle.
So, Jamie, what do you think the solution to this challenge is, whether it's short-term or long-term? Clearly, I certainly appreciate the programs Michael referenced, but if you talk to business people in Denver, especially downtown, the impact of homeless people on the street, on their businesses is very significant. Denver is getting a reputation in certain circles in terms of travel and leisure as you don't want to be downtown, but most importantly, the people involved who are homeless, who don't have a place to go. We've had a lot of controversy about sweeping streets of homeless people, where homeless people lose their belongings, where they're simply pushed off the street. Of course, the vote on 300 that failed, but still had a very significant amount of support within the community. What would you do as mayor differently than what Mayor Hancock is doing? And what do you see as the solution?
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about and what the audit pointed out, which is that you need a clear strategy to understand who are the homeless. We talk about the homeless as a group of people, but these are individuals with a variety of challenges. There was a great article that came out today I was reading before I came here that talked about the fact that, it used to be that homelessness came out of a challenge in cities in poverty. And now homelessness we're seeing in our most prosperous cities increase significantly. It's a direct connect to the cost of housing and to wages. And to a large degree, what you're seeing in terms of the data, and Michael can keep contradicting, but the media and the point-in-time surveys all show our homelessness is increasing, the number of deaths we've had on the streets decreasing, and I don't know where these 8,000 people have been housed, but nobody can seem to provide the data. The numbers of people on the street are increasing, and the number of people in stress is increasing. We have a significant increase in homeless families, a significant increase in homeless younger individuals. But also at the same time, 60% of the people on our streets are working. They're working full-time jobs, sometimes they're night jobs. So there's multiple pieces to the approach. And it's not a solution you can certainly talk about in as you said, a two-minute soundbite. What we know is that there's a need.
I'm willing to give you more than 2 minutes.
Okay, let's go. What we know is that there's a need for an immediate place for people to go. And that's been, I think, the big issue with the sweeps is it's a move along to where question. you can sweep, you can talk about the encampments having, health challenges, but you sweep them and they move to someplace else, and it creates more instability and more instability. We don't have enough shelter facilities. The city has really struggled to wrap its head around how to do tiny homes. We need some of those immediate solutions so that if we want people to go someplace, we provide options, and there's showers and there's bathrooms and there's lockers and there's ways for them to get services and get support that they need. And then moving on to the next step is, how do we actually get them into housing? There's some great programs out there that the city could really help bolster. DHA's housing voucher program. We have some 23,000 vacancies in our apartments across the city. If we could figure out how to bridge the gap, a lot of people are just 1 or 2 paychecks away from being homeless. I met a 62-year-old man a couple weeks ago who lost his wife and daughter in the last year, had to pay for all their expenses, and was homeless for the first time in his life because he didn't have a family. So understanding who people are, the number of homeless families, how do we get people into apartments and facilities that serve the whole family and understand the whole family challenge? And then of course we have mental health and addiction challenges. The voters passed in November the mental health sales tax, which I think is great, but the nuance in that is, how are we going to deploy it? Is it going to be a little money sprinkled to a lot of different places, or are we going to take that and actually invest in facilities to address mental health and services head on? And then of course you have the addiction piece of this. And we know the opioid and heroin epidemic has become a challenge, but it's a challenge cities are seeing everywhere. How do we really deploy services to get people there? But, not to be geeky about the whole thing, but ultimately, from a strategy perspective, this is why that audit was so important. Who are the people on our streets? Where is the gap in services? Where are we going to push them to if we continue to sweep them? And ultimately, how do we bridge the gap and that disconnect between the cost of housing, the low wages here, and the people that are just trying to get by in Denver?
I think what you hear in that 5-minute presentation is Jamie doesn't having ideas that's different from what we're already doing. And I've been stressing this throughout the entire campaign. So let me just get it. Vacancies, the Live Denver program, partnering with landlords, employers, and Denver's housing fund. Putting employees into those vacancies is a partnership that we rolled out 2 years ago. It had some legal challenges initially that we did not anticipate, but it's now rolling in partnership with DHA. The housing voucher, we just announced a $15.7 million partnership that includes DHA and a whole collaboration of folks who are not only extending day shelter, but also providing housing bridge vouchers for individuals who are on our streets. The encampments pose a health and safety issue. And so while we are dead set on being a city that's compassionate and not suggesting that people sleep outside, or we remove the urban camping ban as Jamie has proposed so that folks can stay outside, we must recognize that we have boundaries to our compassion. And those boundaries say it's not compassionate for you to be outside, it's not healthy, it's not safe, and it's certainly not sanitary for the homeless or for the general public. And that's why the urban camping ban is so important, because that tree line is important to be protected, as well as 16th Street Mall, while we try to move folks to housing and at least temporary shelter. One of the things that I find interesting in people who talk about deaths on our streets, 200 plus a year, is that they don't talk about the real challenge of opiate and methamphetamine addictions that is a scourge in this city and across this nation today. As if the fact that the city hasn't found a bed for them is responsible for their death. Some people have died as a result of hypothermia and being exposed to the elements outdoors, or just safety risks. But we gotta talk about the issues that drugs, particularly opiates and methamphetamines in Denver, and how that contributes. And so if you marry up the number of overdoses that are happening in Denver and those who are dying on the street, we will find some congruence with regards to those numbers and causes. But the audit that the auditor released also, not as a result, but as we were moving along, was the creation of the Housing and Homelessness Department in the city of Denver at a cabinet level position, or cabinet level in my administration. We have created that. We have a chief housing officer now, where all those resources are going to be consolidated. So we are not only responsive to the audit, as the auditor has put out there, but we have also said this was important a year before the audit came out, and we were moving in that direction. And then finally, one thing that Jamie did say that was correct was that this is about individuals. If every one of us in this studio was homeless, we have to tailor our approach to each and every one, because the cause of your homelessness is different from mine. And that's what we are doing. It is slow, it is strategic, but we must address on a tailor-made basis the cause of homelessness of every individual on the street. Not every individual, well, because we come out and say, let's go indoors, will go indoors. I've had those conversations with the homeless. Jamie, I don't know if you've had that conversation with homeless, but many of them say, I'm not going in. We can tell you about Jerryville and Mr. Jerry himself, who we have found an apartment not once, not twice, but 3 times. And he chose not to come in and sign the lease. And he'll tell you directly, I'm not coming in because I'm not leaving my soldiers out on the street. So this city has stayed consistent, resilient, and diligent on trying to house the homeless. That's why we've seen a 34% decrease in homelessness over the last 8 years, because we stay focused and we take our time and we're patient with the challenges of those individuals who are most vulnerable on our streets.
I don't think that the community thinks we're winning on homelessness.
No one said we're winning.
And so a lot of these initiatives that you've talked about, you know, early in the campaign, I came out and talked about elevating housing and homelessness to a cabinet level position. Then it happened. A lot of these initiatives are happening at the last minute. For the last 8 years, we haven't been tackling the problem as it's increased. And I'm just going to call it out right here that the last minute politicking to create the Department of Housing, the Department of Housing and Homelessness, the Department of Transportation, these are moves at the last minute to fix problems that have been growing in intensity over the last several years. So to sit here and say we're doing all those things Jamie talks about, we're not. You still haven't answered the question. When you're moving people along, not everybody is like Jerryville. When you're moving people along, where are you moving them along to?
Well, let me
where
ask
do
you a
they
question.
go?
You asked a question, let's answer it. Because we're not going to be like LA, who told people to move along and they didn't have a place. And the court said, you can no longer do that. And that's why you have 20, 30 blocks of encampments in Los Angeles. You don't have that in Denver, Colorado, because we do not go into encampments to move along unless we have a bed in which to move them. It's an underlying value and responsibility that we have.
That is not true. You send them to shelters, there are not beds there. And
That is a
shelter
bed. Jamie, you're
lot of
talking
people
about something
can't-
you don't know. Every night we are running totals of our shelter beds. When we have 150 people on the street, we have 230 beds that are open. We know.
And they don't
first
accept
in time,
LGBTQ, and they don't accept couples, and they don't
absolutely.
accept
Hold
people
on,
with
hold on,
service
hold on. There are
animals.
some shelters
All right.
that you're right, have barriers. And we are working with new shelters to bring down those barriers. So let's talk about, and this I think is an underlying indication that you have no idea how government operates. Let me
I
finish.
appreciate
Let me
that.
finish. Let
I
me finish.
appreciate that.
You love to talk over me, but let me finish. And that is, with regards to the Department of Transportation and Mobility, it took us 2 years to disentangle the bureaucratic wires of the Department of Public Works, which is as old as the city of Denver. And so that we can focus on a $2 billion commitment, but also the priority of mobility. And so a new director, the legal team work, and the entire public works team work to disentangle so you don't have employees working on basic operations, but also leaning over to transportation. And that's been the reason why we had such a confusion in terms of how we can advance transportation mobility as a priority in the city of Denver. So
Okay,
she needs to understand this before she can say,
Enough.
you talk about
Thank
last minute,
you.
you talk about last
Thank
minute
you.
stuff,
Okay,
not last minute.
I appreciate that there's a lot of, let me just say one thing.
So I've got a couple comments I want to make, just to interject. But first, I want to give you a chance to respond to some of the things that Michael said. So please, go ahead.
I just want to, I really want to say a couple things. First of all, this one comment. It is incredibly patronizing to just come at this and say, you don't understand, you have no idea, you don't know anything. Look, I am in this race because I heard from the community that there is frustration with how the city is being run. 62% of the voters on election day voted for somebody other than you.
75 vote against you.
62% of the voters voted for an option other than you. So, what I want to say is this. I have spent a career working on issues. I have fought in this race hard with a lot of conversation and ideas. I have read the budget. I have read the documents in the city. We can figure out a way forward because other cities have. You provide scare tactics and fear tactics, like some new leadership is a scary thing. And some of our best mayors, some of our best leaders who have led us through have had far less experience than I have coming into this office. Far less actually tackling the challenges. And you know I've been working side by side with your administration trying to address homeless challenges. You know that.
Okay, so I have a quick question because for you, Jamie, in terms of experience, because my limited understanding of your background is that you've worked with a lot of different governments, but I'm not hearing you say that. So fill me in on some of the work you've done, some of the government entities you've worked with, whether it be here or elsewhere in the United States or elsewhere around the globe.
Yeah, I appreciate that. My work in this arena actually started when I was 26 working in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where I first ran a business improvement district, was working with tax increment financing, and was working on downtown revitalization work. And it was my first entree into this line of work and really understanding the importance of having government that works with the community and with the people. And one of the most interesting experiences I had in Cedar Rapids was we recognized the inefficiency of the government structure there. I was actually part of a team of people that put a vote to the voters to overturn a form of government and install a whole new leadership team. I took that experience and it has taken me across the country and around the world. I've advised to government, the Singaporean government. I was appointed to commission on the UK Labour Party. I have worked with local governments across the country. And as Michael knows, I have worked alongside the city here on a number of different issues ranging from homelessness to affordable housing to streets and improvements to green stormwater infrastructure. And my role has always been to be an advisor, a strategist, bring in best practices, help bring in community voices into better leadership at the city or at that government level. So that's the lens through which I see this, is that it's always easy to say we're doing this and this is the solution, but people are frustrated that they want something better and they think there is something better. So our opportunity is to help figure out and be inspired by what that better is.
Okay, so I have two questions for each of you. And Jamie, I'm going to start with you. When you look at other communities around the country, who's doing a great job addressing the issue of homelessness? And what are they doing that we are not doing?
Well, I think when you look at, so there's a variety of approaches that are happening in different places across the country. Each of them coming with different levels of success. Austin is going to a community housing model where, much like the tiny homes, there's community housing, there's resources, there's services. They're moving people into interim solutions while they move them into permanent ones. Of course, Salt Lake City was one of the first cities to really try to tackle, through the true housing first model, building hundreds and hundreds of housing units and moving people into them regardless if they had addiction issues or mental health issues, understanding that stabilization started with a bed in your own place to sleep at night.
And by the way, isn't that a principle that we all pretty much can agree on, that the most immediate need, and although
Yes.
the needs, as each of you have pointed out, of homeless people vary on an individual basis, and Michael, you've really emphasized that, but the bottom line is we can do more addressing this problem by simply giving people a place to live and then helping them with the individual needs you reference. Are we in agreement with that? Okay.
Base level of efficacy.
All right, so finish and then I want...
We are in agreement with that, although I would say while Michael talks about housing first as a policy, there hasn't been a tremendous amount of that housing first approach. There was an effort through the social impact bond to address some of the people most in need on the street. And there are other organizations like the VOA doing true housing first models where they're working to get people off the street even if they have other issues that need to be addressed. That's a place where I think we could do a lot more. The other thing goes back to my original point about understanding who our homeless are, what their needs are, and how we move them through to services. And that's the other place where you're seeing a number of cities invest in a better, right now we measure our homeless through something called the point in time count. We pick one day, we go out and we try to understand who they are. Doesn't give us a true understanding of the variety of issues. Other people are using more data-driven approaches to understand day-to-day who are these individuals, what are their needs, and how do we ensure we get them to stabilization, not just get them to Denver Health for an issue and know that they'll be spit back out in the system. We need to actually help them move to a better, more stable place.
Okay, Michael, I'd be really interested as you look around the country, who's doing a better job? What practices are out there that we should take a look at and maybe adopt so we can do a better job here in Denver?
We adopted some models. I mean, you go to Seattle, we saw some unique, innovative shelter strategies that they've deployed, but also some things not to do. For example, they commit over $1 billion in homelessness and they've not seen a decrease whatsoever.
How much?
Over $1 billion.
That's what I thought you said.
Over $1 billion in homeless.
Now, when you say haven't seen a decrease, one of my questions, I think a lot of citizens wonder, and I don't mean to be cruel, but if we do too good a job, I don't know how to phrase it properly.
It's true.
Will we attract more people? And is Seattle, could that be a phenomenon that Seattle's experiencing?
They could very well be experiencing it. And, you know, talk to the mayor of Seattle, several mayors of Seattle since I've been mayor, and actually it does attract new folks. I mean, we see people in Denver who said, I talked to someone named Paul, who's been on Denver streets for 3 years, said he came here because he learned about Denver services for homelessness. You saw an individual in the No 1300 who said, I came here from Arizona because I Googled who has the best homeless programs, and Denver was at the top of that list. So they came to Denver. So the reality is that you look at Seattle, you look at best practices in Texas, you look at Houston, for example, but you take little things from different cities. Denver's also on that list. I mean, our social impact bond, I can tell you, we were the first to use it for homelessness. And I remember announcing it at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and the number of mayors that came up to me saying, I'm coming to look at your model. And we host mayors all the time looking at how we address homelessness. So while we can try to down Denver, and what our approach has been to homelessness, the reality is that Denver is actually being held up as one of the best cities in America for addressing the challenges of homelessness.
All right, so just from my perspective, we have over 300,000 housing units in the city and county of Denver. We are a nation, a state, a city of incredible wealth. The homeless numbers, depending on what surveys you look at, 4,000, 5,000, some higher numbers, some lower. Chronic numbers, maybe 1,500. Why can't we dedicate the resources needed to house these people? I mean, the cost, you know, even if it's 50, 75,000, whatever it is, per unit, to house 4,000 or 5,000 people is something we should be able to do. Why don't we undertake a 5-year program that builds, I mean, we're building 10 to 15,000 luxury condo units every year in Denver alone. Why can't we build 1,000 units a year for 5 years to provide temporary and maybe in some cases permanent housing for the homeless, and then be able to leverage those other programs you've talked about in terms of mental health, addiction, education, training, jobs, employment, so that we can put people on paths to success?
Well, let's just discuss it in practical reality sense. Over the last 8 years, we've been able to permanently house 8,000 homeless. That's roughly on estimate 1,000 people per year, right? So that's to your point. The reality is that we oftentimes leave out the mitigating circumstances that impact. And so to say that, and it's a laudable goal, and we should always aim to house people first. But we got to be realistic about the challenges of every individual. We go back to the point that for every individual that's homeless, we must have a tailored approach. And there are different reasons for why people are homeless and different barriers that people have to get over. So if you take someone, and we estimate anywhere from 40 to 45% of people in our city have a behavioral health challenge, mental health being the chief among them. If I can take you and put you into housing, but if we leave your challenges unaddressed, chances are it's not going to be for very long. And so you're right, you've got to intensify your services that you present and wrap that individual with. And sometimes, though housing first is the model, you must address those issues first before we can move someone into stable housing, more permanent housing.
Jamie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I want to add on to this conversation because we're sort of going over to the conversation about affordable housing and what our priority is around that as a city, right? Because we're talking about a gap. Again, there's a significant chunk here of people that are working, that are a couple paychecks away from being in a home or not in a home. And a lot of the homeless, you know, they might not even be sleeping on our streets. It's just that they're sleeping in a hotel or they're couch surfing or they're in and out of housing because you have to, you know, put your first 2 months of rent up, and you have to, if you've been evicted before, that puts
Or they're sleeping in a car.
Or they're sleeping in a car. So, being able to bridge that gap, and it goes back to this piece that I said, that prosperity has led to homelessness here. It's a wages and a cost of living thing. So when you look at the cost of living piece, another data point, 95% of our affordable housing right now is being built by nonprofits or Denver Housing Authority or others, which means only 5% of the affordable housing coming onto the market is being built by the private sector. Meanwhile, they're building luxury condos, luxury units, very expensive units for people here, that even people who have good wages are having a hard time affording. So requiring more of our development community to participate in the solution should be part of the conversation as well. When we talk about homelessness, I think people and taxpayers get very worried about a constant subsidization of helping people get off the street. But I think there's a real opportunity here to look at the issues of the cost of housing and how we help people get into that housing, how we help bridge that gap and help get people stabilized, because it's our teachers that can't afford to live here, our police officers, our firefighters, people who are service workers that are helping to grow the city's economy. We have a responsibility to ensure they can live here too. And again, I think that has to be part of the homeless conversation.
Okay, let's talk about affordable housing, since we kind of are segueing into it. One of the challenges with affordable housing or attainable housing is that when you look at the marketplace, you have two phenomena. You referenced, and I referenced, the number of, for example, of apartments or condominiums being built, luxury. And the bottom line is, if you're a developer, if you're a builder, the cost of building a 1,200 square foot luxury condo isn't twice as much as building a 1,200 square foot affordable condo. And so you're in it to make money. And the bottom line is, if the demand is there, if people are coming into Denver, whether it be from other parts of the state or the metro area or other parts of the country or other parts of the world, and you can sell that product, you're going to go for that product because you're going to make way more money, much, much more money. So understanding that phenomenon, and then when you add that to the fact that real estate values in Denver and in the metro area continue to increase, and if you're a property owner, real estate taxes aside, that's a wonderful thing as you watch your equity go up. But that increase, I think what people are ignoring in this discussion when it comes to attainable housing and affordable housing is that increase in value of real estate is taking out of inventory more affordable housing than all the government entities and all the government programs, federal, state, and local, can build in our building. And what that means is, if you look at the numbers, we are losing the number of affordable units in our marketplaces when you subtract from the new affordable units being built, when you subtract from that the number of affordable units already in the marketplace being taken out of the market. We're losing this battle. So tell me, what is the answer? And certainly address the issue. Are we simply not asking developers and builders to pitch in enough? And I mean substantially enough. And what other solutions are there? Michael, I'm going to let you tackle that first, please.
Sure. Well, actually, Aaron, today we have committed over $300 million over the next 5 years to affordable housing. This year alone, the city of Denver will spend $60 million. And I'll remind you once again, this is not a function that is typically part of the general fund in the city of Denver.
Is this to build, or what is the money being used for?
What we use the money for are a couple of things. One is we partner with builders, whether nonprofit or private. If they're doing multi-family units, that we incentivize the coveting of those units for affordability. And we, if you're doing 45, we may go in and buy up 5 of them, at least covet them for up to 60 years now in Denver. So you create kind of a mixed opportunity within that. So what we know from developers and builders is that the cost of building these affordable units in these multi-family units is just as expensive as building the market rate. And we want a seamless transition between those units. We have a lot of them in downtown. In fact, since I've brought the city into helping to build affordable housing, we have built in excess of 6,000 units that way. Again, partnering with nonprofit as well as the private sector. You've got affordable units down in Union Station, for example, where I've heard some amazing rent costs for people. But we also use that money to help people with, down payment to get into an apartment. With the deposits that they need. We help through our program called Temporary Rental and Utility Assistance, help people stay in those units when they have a temporary hiccup. We had one individual, for example, who got sick. She's a single mother of 2 kids, ended up in hospital for a week, but for that temporary utility assistance program, she would have been homeless with her 2 children. The city was able to step in, pay her rent while she got back to work, and was subsequently able to take care of her rent. So we have that. The Live Denver program I talked about also comes out of that fund. But let me also tell you what we're doing now, $60 million. There are limitations in terms of the builders, in terms of projects, but we invest as they're moving on, and we're building them primarily around transit sites, because if we can blend access to good, affordable, reliable transit while also bringing good, affordable housing, then we really begin to level the playing field. We're using that money today. We're buying up land all over the city of Denver. We're partnering with developers and builders to incentivize and build affordable housing, and we're helping folks stay in place and preserve their ability to stay in affordable units.
All right, we only have a couple minutes left in our first segment, so Jamie, I want to give you the last word on this.
Okay. Well, there's a lot to tackle there. I think your primary question is, are we asking enough of the development community? And I don't think we are. You know, we had the inclusionary housing ordinance, which required over a certain number of units being built, that a certain number of them be affordable. That went away in place of the linkage fee, which has funded the Affordable Housing Fund. But now we have money going into a fund that's at the discretion of the city to use on programs as they see fit. But it isn't necessarily directly resulting. I mean, we can talk about it, but it's not, that fund itself isn't necessarily directly resulting in units. We give developers a lot of leeway in terms of what they can do in the city and rezonings and more and more. I think the opportunity to ask more of them in terms of affordability, design, a lot of elements that community wants, as demonstrated by what happened at the 38th and Blake rail station, which was the first time the city did a density bonus that said, you can build higher, but you put more affordable and you do it there when you do it. So I think we have to ask more of our development community in tackling this complex challenge. And there's a role the city can play too. We can look at the time it takes for us to do permitting, because time is money when you're sitting on land. We can look at those permitting fees, about inspection processes, about how we help move things along faster for people that want to do the right thing. But the other piece about the displacement piece I think is really important, because you talked about the property taxes. And when you look at what's happened over the last few years, and there's a great heat map that you can see that shows where property taxes increase most. You're seeing maybe 10% increase around places like downtown. But in places like Montbello and Globeville and Elyria, Swansea and Sun Valley, you're seeing 40, 50% plus property tax increases in places that already are trying to struggle to stay in their homes and their neighborhoods and their communities. And that's a conversation I hope we can have in the second hour about displacement. Because that is one of the things where we can use the levers of government to go in and say, how do we help these neighborhoods that are in their own homes but are being displaced because they can no longer afford their property taxes or maintenance on those homes? How do we help them stay in place? Can we do more on the property tax rebate side? Can we help them invest in their homes? Can we create some new tools that can help them address their cost of living so that they don't get pushed out? And that's at the place where I think we failed. Top in the nation for Latino displacement, third in the nation for displacement of our Black communities. And that's an important conversation that we need to have, because it's not about building new affordable, it's about preserving existing communities that are here.
Okay, we're going to move on to personal transportation. I'm going to throw out an idea that may be foreign to you, but there's always a lot of talk about public transit, mass transit. How do we move people more effectively? Is it possible, is it in the realm of possibility, when you look at the cost per mile or per passenger of public transit, that it actually would be more effective, more efficient, and more comfortable for those involved if we move to a model using essentially ride sharing, whether it be Uber and Lyft and eventually autonomous vehicles. And let me explain why. One, you all know the cost issues. When you build rail, when you build dedicated bus lanes, whatever the case, you end up with, from a total cost perspective, an extraordinary per mile cost for passengers or per ride cost. What I also look at is, how about elderly people or people with disabilities? Think about their needs. They have to get from their home to a point of public transit. Then they have to take the public transit, and then they have to get from that point the public transit ends, to a doctor's appointment, medical, to go grocery shopping, whatever. On the other hand, if they're getting a ride, somebody picks them up at home, might even help them down the stairs, takes them to wherever they need to go, drops them off, and someone else can bring them back. Why aren't we looking at that model and potentially saving hundreds of millions of dollars in Denver? Michael, I'm going to let you answer first.
I think you need to look at all those things. And Aaron, I'm the caretaker of my mother, who's 80 years old. And oftentimes she has to get to her doctor's appointments, as you pointed out, and I will dispatch Lyft or Uber to pick her up and get her home, and I'm constantly on the phone. Even as mayor of Denver, I am in meetings making sure I'm watching my mother drive down I-70 or be driven down I-70 to her doctor's appointment. I mean, the reality is that there is a gap there. And one of the things when we created the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure that's being deployed, going to the voters this November, is we gave them the authority to create an intra-city transit authority so that we can begin to close those first last mile gaps, as well as be creative when it comes to our older adults in Denver. And so I'm looking for those type of innovative models that we can drive that, because I look at my mother, only reference points I have is that we've got some older adults in the city who are struggling to move from point A to point B. The other thing is we got to look at models that really make sense. Jamie talks about the trolley car, which is 2 to 3 times more expensive, not only in aggregate, but also per mile to operate, and doesn't really connect people to the services, to the retail that you want them to connect to. It's cute, it looks sexy on the road, and it is used really to redevelop areas that are in decline or gentrify areas. And so bus rapid transit is a more affordable, makes more sense. And so you have to look at really the common sense of a lot of these options. You don't take them off the table, but you look and say, we can deploy this one now in a lot more cost-effective manner than this one, and we can also get A, B, and C in terms of the benefits.
All right, Jamie, I'm going to give you a chance to talk, and you get last word on the topic.
Okay. Well, I think you're absolutely right that we have to look at all innovative models. Technology is moving so fast right now on transportation that we have an opportunity to be innovative, because unlike other cities, we don't have a system that's already in place that we'd have to fix or amend. We have the opportunity to build one of the most innovative systems in the country to truly connect our neighborhoods. So we have to look at everything. And we do have to look at the investment up front as well as ongoing operational. But I think it's important that we not set aside any opportunity to build. I mean, the mayor just said, trolley cars and gentrification. Look, cities around the world have had fixed rail transit systems to connect their intracity networks for a long time.
And Denver used to.
And Denver used to. And you hear great stories of nostalgia about how people could pay 50 cents and ride and visit their neighbors and their friends. That ability to connect neighborhood to neighborhood is what we're looking for. And transit and mass transit is always a solution, but it has to be done well and it has to be well connected. There was an article that came out a few months ago that said Denver has one of the best transit systems in the country that takes people nowhere that they need to go. So making sure that we build transit for people to get them where they do need to go and how they move now is going to be really important. And I think you will see an increase in ridership if you invest in that mass intracity transit network.
All right. That's going to be the end of part 1 of our special 2-part series with Michael and Jamie. Make sure you watch part 2. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.